Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lauren Cornegay-Dollar and I'm the Adult Programs Coordinator here at the National Museum of the Pacific War. I see some of our regular guests already know the drill and they are putting into the chat where they're streaming in from. For our new guests, if you could let us know where you're streaming in from, I love to see where everybody is at, and I also do some shout outs. So let's see, let's scroll to the top and see who we have coming in today. We've got some friends over in Pennsylvania, several in Texas, hello, New Jersey and Ohio, Missouri, Colorado, Louisiana, that's great, Massachusetts, Ohio. Correct me if I'm wrong, do I see Manila? Is Manila in the house? I'd like to give a special shout out to all of our guests coming in from the Philippines, because if my phone is correct, it's like 1 a.m. there. So thank you so much for joining us today. I don't want to take too much time for the intro because I know our guest speaker has a lot to share with us. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker for today. She is the founder and executive director of the Bataan Legacy Historical Society, Ms. Cecilia Gaerlan.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I know that people have logged in from all over the United States, including the Philippines. And I want to thank Lauren and Ron for giving me this opportunity to speak before you about the Bataan Death March, the battle in Bataan, and its significance today. So the organization was founded in 2012 to address the lack of information about the Filipinos in Bataan. When I was growing up, I had the impression that most of the soldiers in Bataan were Americans, when in fact 7/8 of the main line of resistance were Filipinos. So there were 19,000 Americans, 12,000 Philippine scouts. These were Filipino soldiers whose officers were mostly Americans, and about 118,000 Filipinos. So I am here because of my father, Luis Gaerlan Jr., who survived the Bataan Death March. And through him, I learned of some information, very little, because as I found out later when I was doing my research, most of the veterans did not want to share their experience in Bataan. And so this is our mission, is to instill civic pride and engagement in young adults through the lessons of World War II from the perspective of Filipinos and Americans, including civilians, not just soldiers, but civilians. So between 2014 and 2016, we worked successfully with the California Department of Education to include the Battle of Bataan, the Bataan Death March, and several other events that happened during World War II in the Philippines. This was approved for inclusion as part of Chapter 16 of the Grade 11 U.S. History in California. And because California is one of the largest consumers of textbooks, most publishers of the main textbooks include any changes in California and Texas, actually, Texas and California. Any changes in these two states' curriculum framework, they include in the new textbooks. But these textbooks are actually distributed throughout the country. So if you're not in Texas or California, Chapter 16 is also part of the Grade 11 U.S. History, wherever you are. So this is the goal of, we use primary documents. And these are some of the events that we were able to include in Chapter 16. And I will discuss them briefly, but concentrate on the Battle of Bataan. I just want to go through a few items before we get to Bataan. So why were the Americans in the Philippines during World War II? Well, as many of you know, the Philippines became a territory, became a colony of the United States in 1898 after the Spanish-American War, and Spain ceded the Philippines, Cuba, and Puerto Rico for $20 million. And then fast forward, I can't discuss anything between 1898 and 1931 because there's too many things that happened. But Japan was already becoming a superpower. In 1905, they defeated Russia, and that's how they were able to get Korea. And so in 1931, it enters Manchuria. And by 1932, it became a territory of Japan, and it was renamed Manchukuo. So one of the documents that we use in our lesson plans is the Tidings-McDuffie Act. So the Philippines was acquired in 1898. By 1934, Congressman McDuffie and Senator Tidings sponsored this bill. It was called the Philippine Independence Act because it was supposed to prepare the Philippines for 10 years for its eventual independence. In reality, it was actually a bill that was endorsed by the agricultural sector. Why? Because they didn't want competition from tax-free goods coming from the Philippines into the United States. So basically, it was heavily endorsed by the agricultural section. And this bill also limited the immigration of Filipinos into the United States to 50 a year, 50. But before that, Filipinos were treated as nationals, like Puerto Rico is today. And those who were already Filipinos who were already in the United States were reclassified as aliens after the passage of this bill. This bill also established the eventual installation of military bases, U.S. military bases in the Philippines, even after its independence. So the Philippine Commonwealth, mind you, Commonwealth, the Philippines was still not independent. It didn't gain its independence until 1946. So the Philippine Commonwealth was established in 1935 with President Manuel L. Quezon, and General Douglas MacArthur became its military advisor. So MacArthur was formerly the chief of staff from 1930 to 1935. And then upon his retirement, he became, first he became the military advisor. And then after his retirement, he became like the field marshal of the proposed Philippine Commonwealth Army. This is the fall of Nanking. So the second Sino-Japanese War, the first one was in 1895. This is the second one, China and Japan. Japan invaded China, and you all know about the fall of Nanking, where thousands, between 200 to 300,000 civilians, we don't really know the exact count, were slaughtered. So in 1939, Germany invades Poland, and this was the beginning of World War II. And we must remember that in 1937, the United States Army, because of its isolationist policies, ranked number 17 in the world's armies. So war was a thing that most people feared and tried to escape. You know, they didn't want to talk about war. So in 1940, November of 1940, because technically war started in Asia in 1931, as you saw previously when they invaded Manchuria. And with the war in Europe, Admiral Howard Stark, the chief of naval operations, drafted what is called Plan Dog Memo. Now, what is Plan Dog Memo? Plan Dog Memo was it actually outlined the scenarios that the United States can find itself, because the United States did not have enough resources to fight a war in two theaters, in two fronts, in Asia and Europe. Basically, it set forth the reasons why we should fight the war in Europe first, and then after that is done, then we concentrate our resources in Asia. And so this became the basis Rainbow Plan 5. Rainbow Plan is a coalition it's actually Rainbow Plan because it color-coded the enemies into different colors. And so this was number 5. The first one was drafted beginning of the 20th century. And then, so basically what happened was United States can only fight a war one at a time. So it concentrated most of its resources in Europe. And when that war is about to finish, then it would concentrate a majority of its resources in Asia. And that is also one of our resources, Plan Dog Memo. So between January and April of 1941, we had the ABDA, American, British, Dutch, Australian Command, which set forth the defense plan in the Philippines and other parts of Asia. So let's see what happens on December 8th. As most of you know, President Roosevelt stated that this was a surprise attack, sudden and deliberate attack. But as I showed you previously, people knew that war was coming. However, General MacArthur thought that Japan will not invade until April of 1942. So the Philippines was not at all prepared during on December 8th, even though there was a heightened state of alert by November 27, when negotiations between Japan and the United States broke down in Washington, D.C. And as a matter of fact, the Japanese Navy left Japan on November 25 for its destination. Now, this was the disposition of the troops. In September of 41, General MacArthur thought that the plan to defend the Philippines, which is in the war plan, from Bataan, was a defeatist effort. And so he spread out the troops throughout the Philippines. And so on December 8th, the Philippines was attacked. On December 10, the first Japanese troops landed. And then December 22nd, majority of the 14th Army of Japan landed in Lingayen Bay. And by December 23rd, General MacArthur was ordering his troops to move and revert to the original war plan. That's War Plan Orange, to Bataan. At the same time, when President Roosevelt was giving a speech to the Americans of the Philippine Islands, because he termed Americans, Filipinos were still considered Americans at that time, to fight for the United States. But at the same time, he was meeting with Prime Minister Churchill in Washington, D.C. to solidify the Europe First policy. And so this was the Battle of Bataan that took place between January and April of 1942. It was a 99-day battle. After 1 month, actually less than a month, on January 5, the troops were already placed on half rations. But 2 weeks after, General MacArthur told the troops that miles of ships and supplies are on the way. But we all know that that never happened. And so in March, the troops were already on quarter rations. The Far East Air Force was decimated during the first week of the war. A lot of the planes in Clark Air Base were destroyed during the first day. And then after 1 week, there were only a few reconnaissance planes. So basically, the troops were fighting without air support, and they were going on half rations by January 5, and by March, they were on quarter rations. So that by March, majority of the troops, by March, it was only 20% combat efficiency. They were on quarter rations, and the Japanese were shipping in more troops because part of their troops were transferred to Singapore in February. After a week, Singapore collapsed. And so by March, they were receiving fresh troops. And so by April, the beginning of April, there was carpet bombing on April 3rd, so that on April 7th, there were only 2 days left of quarter rations. Majority of the troops were inflicted with disease and starvation. And so on April 9, Major General Edward P. King Jr. was forced to surrender his troops. So this was the route of the Bataan Death March. It was about 65 miles to the prison camp at Camp O'Donnell. And this was April, the hottest month of the year. Triple-digit temperature, 100% humidity. Most of the men were suffering from disease and starvation, and they were forced to walk until San Fernando, where they took a train for 10 kilometers, and then they walked again from San Fernando to Camp O'Donnell. So as I said, majority of the troops were dying from starvation and disease, and those who could no longer go on were either beaten or shot or beheaded even. And those who took the train, they were standing up in these cargo trains, and a lot of soldiers died while standing up because of suffocation. And upon reaching Camp O'Donnell, more died. So there is no exact count of how many people died. 75,000 troops, 63,000 Filipinos, and 12,000 Americans were forced to surrender. But it is estimated it's between 5 to 10,000 Filipinos and between 250 and 650 Americans died along the way. But inside Camp O'Donnell, 20,000 Filipinos and 1,600 Americans died while inside the camp. That is the situation for the Bataan Death March. But the significance of Bataan and Bataan Death March, as I said before, was it was a rallying cry here in the United States. At that time, people were inspired to sign up and to fight the war because of what happened in Bataan. But unfortunately, as time went on, Bataan was forgotten. And let's remember that Japan had a 50-day timetable to occupy the Philippines. But the troops who fought without air support and who were suffering from massive disease and starvation were able to hold on for 99 days. And that is the significance of Bataan. And we must remember what is happening today, which is we must be prepared for the whatever happens. Our country must be prepared. And I also have to tell you that the Philippines lost approximately 1 million civilians by the end of the war.
I believe you were going to say a little bit about your commemoration coming up in April. So could you share that information with everybody before we open up for questions?
Yes, since 2012, we have been commemorating the Bataan Death March here in San Francisco, where I am. And on April 5, we are commemorating the 83rd anniversary, and we have about 8 flag officers from the armed forces. We have, for the last 3 years, we have been seeing a lot of law enforcement, safety officers who are mostly veterans to join us. So we have veterans groups, we have cadets, and it's a very moving ceremony. It's like a memorial mass, and it will be live on our Facebook page, Bataan Legacy, no space, Facebook Bataan Legacy. It will be live at starting at 9:45 a.m. Pacific time. So I invite you to those who will not be able to join us in California, please tune in on our Facebook page.
Yes, I'm excited. I will be there. I attended last year and I was a part of the ceremony of the tolling of the bell, so I'm excited to attend this year as well.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you.
we do have some questions coming in. Well, I think one of them is more of a statement, but I'll go ahead and read it out. So, of
Sure.
course, we really didn't understand the Bushido Code, where surrender is unthinkable, and if one does surrender, that person is considered useless and no longer a person. So, I think what they're saying is that at that point, the Filipinos and American troops had not experienced that. Is that your understanding?
Yes, because even among the Japanese troops, they were punished severely. But that is not to say that they did not they committed a lot of war crimes, especially on the civilians and also on the prisoners of war. So that is a fact that you cannot erase.
Okay, we have a couple of other questions and we have some book suggestions. So if anybody's looking for additional books to read on this subject matter, Thomas has recommended The Medic and Escape from Corregidor. So everybody should be able to see those in the comments. So if you're looking for more information on this topic, as well, you can check out our museum's online store. I know we have some books available there too. Next question.
I also want to point out that Corregidor actually fell on May 6th. So those who were in Corregidor did not go through Bataan Death March. They were taken to Manila and they walked what is called the Walk of Shame. They walked from the port of Manila to Bilibid Prison in Manila.
Okay, next question. First off, it says great presentation, and thank you. So, so the question is: any idea of how many U.S./Philippine troops escaped to become guerrillas?
There is no count. I'm sorry to say, but there were a lot of guerrilla groups that were established after the Bataan Death March, mainly from Filipinos and Americans. Actually, the first guerrilla group that is recorded was established December of 41, even before the fall. That was the Hunters guerrillas. And then later on, there were a lot of Filipino and American guerrillas. Actually, even before the fall of Bataan, those who were up in northern Luzon were organizing because they were not able to go to Bataan because some of the roads were blocked or were already occupied by Japan. So they established the first resistance.
All right, just to tease this out a little bit, if you are curious about some of the guerrilla stories, I will be hosting an Untold Stories about the guerrillas and some of the female guerrillas that were involved in the resistance in the Philippines later on this year. So be on the lookout for that later on this year. Next question we have, what American units, divisions, brigades, etc. were on Bataan and in the Death March? Do you know any of them?
Oh, yes. So there was the tank battalions. There was the coast artillery tank battalions. I think many of them came from the Midwest, even Chicago. From the Midwest, a lot of them were from the Midwest, and some were from here in California, the 40th Tank Company in Salinas, California. And then we had the coast artillery, the 200 and the 515th from New Mexico. Of course, we had the Army Air Corps from all over. And of course, because the Far East Air Corps was decimated early on during the first week of the war, these Army Air Corps people became infantrymen. So that's what happened to them. And they were absorbed by the different divisions.
Okay. We have a question about your father. Okay.
Yes,
If you could tell us a little bit more about your father's experiences.
yes. He was 21 when he was drafted, I think in November. So July 26, 1941, when the U.S. Army Forces was established, but it wasn't until September 1941 when mobilization started. And then my father wasn't called until November, and even by December 8th, they were still forming some of these divisions. And it was so, the Philippine Commonwealth Army was so ill equipped. You know, a lot of them were given one pair of uniform that would be shorts, khaki shorts. Some even had like coconut husk helmets, and they were given these World War I Enfield rifles. And according to a report by General Parker, who was then the commanding officer of the Southern Luzon Force, more than 60%, more than 60% of the ammunition were duds because they dated back to World War I. So my father, in answer to your question, he graduated. He had graduated from college, and because he took up ROTC, he was called to serve. And when I was growing up, my father actually, the way he told the stories were, it was like a cowboy story. And when we were young, we used to laugh at his antics because he would have sound effects. And then it was only later on when I started researching that I found out what really happened. And then one day when he was already old and sick, I asked him, Dad, how come you never told me what really happened? Because I asked him about his regiment, 41st Infantry Regiment, which was in Mount Samat during the last days of the war, and what happened to those people. And he broke down. And that's the actually the normal reaction when I interview people. You know, their family members didn't know what really happened to them because it was just such a painful experience for all of them.
Okay. Next question up. Can we still walk the length of the peninsula where the surrendered soldiers had to walk?
Well, actually, you know, they had a walk, I think a week or two ago in the Philippines. And I'm not sure if that was organized by the Army. Of course, it's not like the walk during that time. I guess you go through the highways, and yes, they do have a walk. I think, yeah, in March, a week or two ago. I could ask them when the next one will be next year. But you know, it does not begin to simulate what really happened because majority of those men were dying of starvation and disease. But yes, you can walk it, and also you can visit Mount Samat, where that was the last stand, and also you can visit Camp O'Donnell, or O'Donnell as they call it in the Philippines, the first prison camp where they were incarcerated. And then about August, the American soldiers were transferred to different prison camps in the Philippines, like Cabanatuan, Bilibid, Palawan, and a lot of them died in the prison camps. And you only have to visit the American cemetery in the Philippines to see the walls of the missing, wall upon wall upon wall of names inscribed of those who were never found.
So this question kind of piggybacks on the walk question. Do you know if there are any commemorations along the march path?
Yes, we have a private organization actually established these markers. So every mile they would have a marker dedicated to a soldier who walked the or organization. So yes, they do have markers of the Bataan Death March, and I hope that the government is maintaining these markers, because it's a historic marker and a lesson that we should never forget.
So we have some more questions coming in, but we also have some good points being made. So our next one is they really appreciate the presentation, and they live on Beacon Hill in Seattle, approximately half a mile from Dr. Jose Rizal Park.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
The Philippines national hero.
Okay, there you go. He
Thank
says
you.
that it's very, very moving.
Oh, thank you for being here. Thank you.
And then the next one is, they were also adding provisional tank battalions were all National Guard activated. So just speaking about some of the battalions that were there. We have another comment, which I love because it references one of our previous webinars, that Agent High Pockets is another good book and another resource for people interested in the Philippines during World War II. And I also think her story is quite fascinating. So if you haven't seen that webinar, you can go to our YouTube channel and check it out. And then our next one is my great uncle was from the 40th Tank Battalion and is still unaccounted for, having died at, I am not going to pronounce that properly, but it starts with a C.
In Cabanatuan?
Yeah. How many POWs died there?
Yes. I don't have an exact count, but that's in Salinas, I think, that 40th Tank Company. And out of 139, I don't know, I think only 40 made it back. A lot of people died from that tank company. And actually, on April 5, we have a prayer during the tolling of the bells, not just for the tank company, but also for the other, those who died, who were in other companies that went to the Philippines, who were in the California National Guard, actually.
All right, next question is about MacArthur.
Yes.
How is MacArthur remembered in the Philippines today? Hero or not?
Actually, Filipinos revered MacArthur. It was like the second coming of Christ. He was revered. I think even now, first thing when they talk about World War II was, I shall return. But I guess even I myself did not know about the background of the war until I started doing research. And so it's a mixed bag, actually. Here in the United States, I think I find more people who are critical of General MacArthur, but in the Philippines, he is still highly regarded, General MacArthur. Oh, can I also insert what happened in 1946? So in 1946, after the Philippines became independent, July 4, 1946, the rescission acts were passed, which deemed the service of the Filipinos under the U.S. Army forces in the Far East as not active. And by doing that, they lost their privileges as veterans. And so that's what happened. It was only very recently in the 90s that they were able to get part of their benefits. But by then, most of those who fought, a lot of them had already passed on.
Okay, let's see. I've got two more comments that have been highlighted for me. One is from Ross, that I have a home in Subic and would like to tour some of these sites. So thank you, Cecilia, for mentioning all of the different sites. And then our next one is the brutality of the war in the Philippines is unknown by so many. Also, the experiences of the women and the children that were held in prison. Do you have any stories, short stories of those that you could share?
Yeah. Yes, actually, we had a conference. Every year we have a World War II in the Philippines conference here in San Francisco. And I think 2 years ago, we had a conference on war crimes, where we start with what's happening in the present, and then we go back to the past about the war crimes in the Philippines. We had what was called the zonification in the Philippines. And this started probably a little bit before the liberation in October, when the Leyte landing happened, but more so, more frequently after the Leyte landing. So the Japanese soldiers, or the Kempeitai actually, spearheaded this. The military, the police, they would go into towns, divide it into zones, pick all the men from 15 up, and even women who were suspected of collaborating with Americans or the guerrillas. And then they put them in church, and then a collaborator with a bag on top of his head, with his eyes, there's holes in, so that he could see, would point out the people who served in the U.S. Army forces in the Far East, the guerrillas, and they were executed. So these were called zonas, or zonification. And in some towns, it was so brutal, like in Batangas, in Laguna, like the whole town would be razed. Like in February 23, 1945, when the American civilian prisoners of war were rescued in Los Baños, the same day, the Japanese soldiers came back at night and slaughtered 1,500 Filipino civilians. So that's typical in Batangas. There were several mass killings, and I found out that a lot of the American pilots, the American aviators who crash landed, they had a meeting point which was near Lake Taal between Batangas and Laguna. And a lot of these towns protected these Americans, to the detriment of their lives, of their families, their community. And I think that's why the Japanese were so severe on these towns, because of the protection that they gave to the American aviators and the guerrilla forces.
So
Yeah.
our second to last question is, what do people think about General Wainwright?
Well, he had no choice. And actually, there was a little bit of confusion, because General Wainwright surrendered in May of 1942. But then General MacArthur he was by then in Australia. He was shipped out on March 12, before the fall, of course. And he ended up, his headquarters was in Australia. And so General MacArthur was furious about the surrender. But these commanding officers in the Philippines had no choice, because they knew it was coming, and they knew that there would be no reinforcement coming from the United States, because the concentration of support went to Europe. They knew it was a foregone conclusion that they had to surrender. And it was very fortunate that they lasted for 99 days. I mean, Singapore lasted only for a week. So that was the situation.
Okay, our last question, and then we'll move on to our program updates for the next couple of weeks. Could you please mention anything you know about what Japan now says on the subject?
Well, from what I know, I could be wrong, but from talking to people in Japan or from Japan, it is not being taught in the schools. Well, for that matter, it's not being taught in the Philippines or the United States. But in Japan, it is not taught at all. At least in the United States, in the Philippines, it is taught somewhat. But in Japan, no. But there are so many groups there who are hungry for information about what really happened during the war. Because I guess they're still being shielded from the realities of war. And my father he did not harbor hard feelings against the Japanese soldiers, because he said war is war. And those who made the decision to go to war, these are not the soldiers. These are the politicians. And there was a lot of chaos in Japan. You know, a lot of ministers, prime ministers were assassinated during the first 30 years of the 20th century in Japan. And that's why it became militaristic. So that's what happened. Yes.
Okay, I want to say a big thank you to Cecilia for joining us today, and for all of our at-home audience. Thank you for staying with us a little long today. I really appreciate you being here and all your great questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you.
So next up, I want to make sure everybody knows about our April webinar. It'll be on April 16th. It'll be entitled When the Men Were Gone, A Story of the Home Front, and it'll be with the author, Ms. Herrera Lewis. Be sure to sign up for that one. Again, April 16th at 1 p.m. And then next up, we have a special Untold Stories episode happening on Thursday, March 27th. And the Untold Stories is our evening series where we can go a little bit longer. Our webinars during the day are designed to be a little bit shorter to fit within somebody's kind of break in the middle of the day. And our evening ones are designed to be a little bit longer and go a little bit more in depth. So this one is all about the adventures of 4 Hill Country students in Japan back at the end of November, early December. I took 4 Hill Country students to Japan through the Kagahashi Project, and they are going to share their experiences and stories with everybody. So please be sure to sign up for that. I know they're very excited to share their stories. Again, I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today, and I will see you next time.